the market is asking for recycled aluminium. It should be 50 or 70 or even 100% recycled aluminium. And there is not scrap enough to fulfill that market demand, I would say. And this is increasing.
It's a wrong scrap.
Yeah. Also, if you look at the properties required, especially if you see large castings or extrusion, they really require very pure alloys. And if you go on the scrap market and look what type is currently, for example, in a car that is in a recycling plant, there's a lot of copper in it, a lot of zinc and other elements that you really don't want to have in your casting. Or
No.
So that means that everybody's fighting for the same scrap. I know that extrusion can pour in 20-25%. And if you look at the car, an electrical vehicle, the amount of aluminum is going up.
Welcome to the Gold Casting Podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about money, growth, margins, and markets. And today we have a very special guest. We have Linge from the Swedish Aluminium Association with us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, some of us have known you since the 90s, but a lot of people in our audience does not have the same relationship with you, Lars-Inge. So could you please introduce yourself and the pieces of your career?
Sure. As you say Linge, and that's good because actually my name is actually Lars-Inge with a hyphen, and born in the 50s, a lot of friends got this hyphen. So I prefer Linge. I've been actually in the aluminium industry for almost 40 years in the marketing and sales and marketing. And when I got this opportunity, I got the question from the association if I wanted to join and lead the organization of the Swedish Aluminium Association. I thought, well, why not? That could be fun. And I'm stuck there. I thought I'd do that for a couple of years, and I'm now heading my 8 years as MD for Swedish Aluminium Association. But my background is within SAPA, aluminium extrusion company, and then today Hydro. Worked a couple of years for Hydro before I took over the Aluminium Association in 2016 and been there since.
What does this association do?
Actually, we have an agenda for 4 areas where we talk about sustainability. I mean, to have a sustainable aluminium industry, that's top of the agenda, not only for us, but also competence resourcing. I mean, we lack thousands of engineers, not only in our industry, but in the industry overall. So we try to work hard on how to recruit new young talents to the metal industry. And we do that together actually with the steel industry and the foundry organization as well, because that's a common issue. Everybody has the same problem to finding competent people to work in the plants, both on an academic level, but I would say mostly on the floor, operators on the floor. The third thing is to work with the politics, of course, the lobbying part. So that's mainly what we have in our agenda for coming. We have call it Agenda 2025, and next year we are already there. So, but we have to keep on fighting.
Is it difficult to get time with? I'm guessing ministers and people in government. Do they understand these questions at all?
Yes and no. They do listen, I must say, because I have quite a few meetings with the Ministry of Industry mainly, but also the Foreign Office, because they are taking care of the trade issues, trade questions. They don't know our industry very well, but now having met with them for a couple of years, they are getting closer to understand what we're talking about. I would say it's easier to meet and talk to them when you have a problem arising. We had 2018, we had the tariffs from US and the sanctions on Russian metal. Then it was not very difficult to get a discussion with them. And now we have a similar issue when it comes to Russian metal, Russian aluminium. And one of our most important Swedish companies, Kubal up in Sundsvall, who is our only primary aluminium producer in Sweden, which we care about a lot because it's extremely important that we keep a primary aluminium producer in Sweden for many reasons.
How is the situation with Russian aluminum today? For us that doesn't know anything.
The thing is that EU has placed several sanction packages, and the latest one, the 13th, there was some aluminium parts, the EN codes, etc., but it didn't affect the import of Russian aluminium to Europe at all, I would say. So today there are no sanctions on either Russian aluminium or Russian companies doing aluminium. Today we have approximately 600,000 tons of aluminium from Russia into EU, mostly in the two countries in the south of Europe, Italy, Greece, among others. And we are pushing together with European aluminium for sanctions on the metal because, as you know, maybe the listeners don't know, but during the energy crisis, more than 50%, almost 50% of the capacity of primary aluminium disappeared in Europe. At the same time, there are no lack of aluminium. And if those 600,000 tons would be, let's say, banned or sanctioned, we would have no problem in Europe to fill that. But we do need also our Swedish producer, owned by Russian Rusal then. So as there are no sanctions, it's a question of moral and ethics if you want to do business with a Russian company. But there are no legal obstacles or sanction obstacles to work with Russian aluminium today.
But how is the figures today if you compare it to before the invasion?
It has reduced with more than 35%. So and still going down. So it has had effect. The war itself in Ukraine and between Russia and Ukraine, but where it will end, it's up to Putin, I guess. When the war is over, what will happen? I mean, Russia is one of the world's largest producer of aluminium, so.
Is it a clean aluminum they're producing? If you take that one, is it made with nuclear powered electricity, or is it coal-based, or where do we find Russian aluminum in terms of carbon dioxide?
They are pretty good, I would say. They're pretty clean. Yeah, they are. And they have come quite far when it's come to carbon-free production of aluminium. They have their biggest plants back in Siberia.
You're saying carbon-free. What does that mean?
Okay, let's say this way. For 1 kilo aluminium, you put out in Sweden, you put out almost 4 kilos CO2 for every kilo you produce. The average in Europe is between 7 and 8, or close to 7 kilos. In Asia, we're talking about maybe up to 20 kilos CO2 per kilo aluminium. So we are really doing good. And I would say that the Russians are close to where we are in the Nordic countries. When I say 4 kilos per kilo CO2, that goes for Norway, Sweden, and Iceland. Iceland even lower, I would say.
And then you're based hydropower energy-based aluminum production. Yeah.
So that's basically, from a primary point of view, the best you can get from a carbon footprint point of view.
It is. I mean, it's 100% water power up in Sundsvall, for example. The CO2 emission that is coming from there is actually from the anodes that you're using in the electrolytic cell. So it's not from the power. The CO2 is not coming from the power.
So it's basically the anodes and also in the mines getting the aluminium oxide out. That's probably also some impact on a carbon footprint.
There we are not in control, as the mines are in Brazil and Jamaica and Ghana and
far away.
And the value chain is actually that the bauxite, which is the mineral there where we extract aluminium. I mean, you have the bauxite, and then you have the aluminium oxide, or alumina, let's say, which is produced mostly in Europe, in Ireland. So the aluminium oxide that comes to Sweden comes from Ireland.
So Ghana, Ireland, Sweden, then you have a primary, and then...
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. One thing that people are lacking knowledge about, which is a new thing, a new animal to treat, is the CBAM. Could you give us an overview, your view of CBAM and what it actually means?
I mean, basically, it's a good proposal and it's a good tool to prevent CO2 emitted aluminium into Europe, because you put a tax actually on how much CO2 you pollute the air with. And mostly this has been driven by European aluminium, but basically it's a good program. The problem with CBAM, and it means actually that you have to pay a separate special tax for the CO2 emission that you have on the material produced outside EU coming into EU. The problem with the CBAM is actually that a lot of materials is flying under the radar, if you may express it that way, because it's kind of squarish. The tool is not really taking care of every part of the aluminium value chain, which means that you can import windows for aluminium windows and you don't have the tax because that's a product, but you put taxes on the extrusion.
Is it the same for castings as well for extrusions, or is a casting part like a window?
I don't have the proper answer to that, but I guess it would be.
We have checked it. Casting is subjected to CBAM, yes.
Yeah.
And the question we stumble across pretty directly is that, if you're then shipping a lot of components from, let's say, India, China, Vietnam, if you do something with them, where do you find a border between a component and an assembly?
Yeah, and we have the similar problem, which I tried to describe. So there is a danger in this, that to avoid these taxes on the CO2, you can actually move the production of, for example, the windows outside EU. And then you have solved the problem. I'm positive about that this will be adjusted. It was in October you have to start a report, and it's not fully implemented until 2026. I think there will be adjustments along the way.
What do you mean with adjustments?
I mean that take care of the sneak holes that you will find. That's my personal guess, and that's also when I have discussion with my colleagues in the European Aluminium Association, that CBAM is good, but it needs to be twisted to make it better and better. And I think that will happen.
What we see is also there's a lot of ignorance about it, that people, probably it will be pushed down the road. Usually EU regulations will be pushed later years. How do you see that?
It's hard to say. You mean that it would be ignored, or
that will be postponed like other regulations, or do you see it as a more like, okay, it's very likely that it stays in 2026?
I think it's very likely. Yeah, I think they're quite firm about that.
So this basically gives the industry, from a point now, less than 22 months to reevaluate their supply chain, because from the 1st January on, it costs money to import components or castings.
Yep. But I mean, basically, as I said in the beginning, I think it's a good tool to actually prevent CO2 emitted aluminium into Europe. And it pushes the importers actually to be more careful.
We see it the same way, that it's a huge opportunity, if you're acting quick, to bring back business into the EU.
Absolutely. And it's a protection tool, of course, in many ways. Not only for the CO2, but it's also protection for the aluminium industry in Europe.
But we have stumbled across some quite interesting aspects of greenwashing. I mean, if you're going to do this, correct me if I'm wrong now. First, you measure your production. You have figures of how your aluminum is produced. Could be oiled burners in India, for example, etc., etc. Then you get a third-party approval that states, okay, this is the CO2 I'm emitting with this product or this production. And then you start to export to Europe, and then I have to pay the difference. Right? It's not far-fetched that you can start to buy these certificates that will say something else than the real number. That's number one. I mean, making
that's illegal.
That's illegal, yeah. But have we seen that before? I mean, I had suppliers in a certain country where they bought the ISO 9000 in a street corner on the way to the conference room.
Yeah.
How is the talk among the powerful people in the aluminum industry to try to at least get a decency level to avoid greenwashing?
I don't know if I can answer that because, I mean, as we said, it's illegal to do that. So, and I've seen it. I've seen it in my organization as well. I can't say that I've heard any discussions around that. But on the other hand, the greenwashing that I can see is maybe when you look at scope 1, 2, 3, you know, in the sustainability travel, if you say so, it's actually how much responsibility does every company take for actually where it all starts? If you would include, as we say, the mining, the transporting, etc., etc. I mean, if you go to the extrusion industry in Sweden, they have close to zero CO2 emission because they are working hard on energy efficiency. They are working hard on taking out all fossil dependent production more and more. But at the same time, if you would put a label on the product in the end of the day in a scope 3, then maybe you should take care of the whole value chain backwards or upstream. There I think it's quite a lot of things to be done in the future to be 100% honest about actually the footprint that you have.
Is there a common standard, or is there a development of a common standard worldwide how to report the CBAM and how to measure it?
I can't say, I don't know worldwide, but in EU, yes. They started this reporting 1st of October, if I remember right.
How is it reporting looking like for a foundry, for example? What do they have to do if they want to import something from outside the EU?
Good question. I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that,
okay.
But I mean, it's first it's a document of origin. I mean, where does this come from? And then I pass, I would say, a couple of stages. To be honest, difficult for me to answer that because I haven't seen it myself.
Okay.
Another type of greenwashing we have seen is the emerging market of scrap. And if I understand it correctly, if you have a rolling mill for aluminum, for example, and you have a lack of orders, you have free capacity, the scrap prices nowadays for high-level scrap, I mean with low silicon, low copper, low iron, is that high that it makes sense to do coils of aluminum from primaries and then sell it as scrap. So you sell the coils. Then you get a higher markup than you actually have on your original product. Yeah, on the spot price.
Yeah, just let it run through your machine and then you produce scrap.
Yeah,
that's actually a big thing in Asia.
I can't say that I've seen anything of that in Sweden. I can only talk for Sweden in that sense. I haven't seen or heard about it. But talking about scrap, the whole casting industry in Sweden is using secondary aluminium. It's only secondary, everything, 100%. But as you said, we need pure aluminium for rolling mills and extrusions. And the biggest problem is the lack of scrap, because there is not scrap enough to fulfill the market demands actually for secondary aluminium.
That's one of the problems.
And we do actually export thousands of tons of scrap. To me, that doesn't make sense. The trading of scrap doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if we have extrusion scrap in Sweden, why should we export that?
Oh, that you don't need to do in 1 year, because there's an alloy called Rio Cool that's going very good, and that needs very clean scrap, predominantly from extrusion. So I know a guy that knows a guy, you know.
Okay.
So if you're sitting on a couple of thousand tons of extrusion scrap, call me.
Yeah, and I mean that's a problem, because I mean the market is asking for recycled aluminium. It should be 50 or 70 or even 100% recycled aluminium, and there is not scrap enough to fulfill that market demand, I would say, and this is increasing.
It's a wrong scrap.
Yeah. Also, if you look at the properties required, especially if you see large castings or extrusion, they really require very pure alloys. And if you go on the scrap market and look what type is currently, for example, in a car that is in a recycling plant, there's a lot of copper in it, a lot of zinc and other elements that you really don't want to have in your casting. Or
No.
So that means that everybody's fighting for the same scrap. I know that extrusion can pour in 25%. And if you look at the car, an electrical vehicle, the amount of aluminum is going up. We all know it. And the interesting thing is that even a higher proportion increase you'll find in high functionality alloys, even from the casting side. Because in the old days, when you did Volvo 245 in the cars we were born and raised in, Linge, they were made with these eutectic, crappy alloys, 1% elongation, good enough. Today, we're speaking about high elongations, high thermal conductivities, high strength, heat treatable, low iron contents. So everybody's fighting for the same scrap. The extrusion plants, the rolling mills, and casting industry. That's problem number one. Problem number two, imagine the pile of scrap we have with these lousy eutectic alloys out there with all the cars that is incoming the next 50 years to be scrapped. What to do with that alloy? No one wants it.
No.
That's going to be cheap.
Good enough is not good enough today.
Oh no. We have been working pretty deeply into the scrap industry together with Stena Aluminum, your friends in Älmhult. Yeah, we are concerned.
It is a problem. It will probably get worse before it gets better. I would say. And on that side as well, I mean, the aluminium industry in Europe can't agree on what is supposed to be called post-consumer scrap or recycled scrap. So that's another issue that needs to be settled.
How could that be a big question when the demand is that high?
Of course, I mean, if you can use production scrap as post-consumer scrap, for example, which is not, should that be included? So, I mean, there are extrusion companies, not in Sweden, but that actually say that they have 100% recycled extrusions from 100% recycled material. It can't be true because you always have to put in some extra primary or maybe silicon or
you're right. And I think, aren't we missing another thing, that the aluminum consumption in the world is just increasing. So even if we had the best scrap system where everything was
sorted, it will not be enough.
No, you have to feed the beast.
Yes.
You have to pour in primaries.
Yes. That will.
And who is the biggest aluminum producing nation today?
Oh, that's a good question. When we talk primary or bauxite or
primary,
I think China.
Yeah. And China is coal-based, give and take.
But they are getting there. They are using down in I can't remember the region's name. They are building water-powered aluminium industry like we change a church.
They do.
They do. And producing at the same level of CO2 that the best in Europe. But if you take the Chinese primary production overall, it's still these 18 to 20 kilo CO2 per kilo aluminium.
So average. What you're saying is that this is probably in 5-10 years, China will be like Rio Tinto, Kubal, everybody else, around 4-ish.
Yeah, I would say that's my guess, yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
They are getting there. They are working hard on that. But at the same time, we know that they are also working on the water-powered or hydro-powered industries. They are building new coal production. So if it takes 10 years or 20 years, I don't know, but they will get there.
I heard an interesting view on when China was building coal plants, and it was actually for reducing the amount of people that was burning coal. Because if you look in the countryside, small towns like 2 million inhabitants or smaller, then in this stove, when they do cooking and warming their houses, they're using coal, right? So by exchanging with a modern coal-fired based power plant outside the town and then feeding electricity and changing the stoves to the electricity and the radiator heating, they actually reduce the CO2 emission of that area.
So maybe if you look at the scooters, if you see them, they are not running by petrol. Most of them are electric scooters where they ride around.
Do you know how long time it took for the government from decision to get rid of the last petrol scooter in Shanghai?
Couple of weeks.
Probably less than 5 years.
It took actually 9 months, according to Chinese people.
That's quick as well. That's quick.
Because first time in Shanghai, I couldn't see my hand. 2 years later, it was like clean.
It doesn't make sense building nice buildings when you cannot see them.
No.
I would start to sell window cleaning agents.
There was one Chinese man who lived by the mountains, and he sold canned air and made millions with that.
Yeah, great.
So I mean, they are smart people in China. They will get there.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the die casting industry, I mean, automotive is everything. And then there's a $1 million question: is how many die casting machines are there on the globe? And one estimation is something around 70,000 machines.
Okay.
Vast majority of it, I would say 40,000 is standing in China. So for me to comprehend, even if we would love to move everything to regional sourcing, how do you move like 6,000-7,000 die casting machines overnight?
Also,
or in short time?
What we are seeing is now that a lot of Chinese companies move into Eastern Europe, or if they stay in China, they adapt quickly to the EU regulations than the European companies.
Yeah, because they can act quickly. But on the other hand, I think companies and governments will also more and more take in consideration the transports.
Oh, yes.
So, I mean, it's still quite far away, China.
Especially we see it now with the war at the Cape in Africa, El Nino affecting the Panama Canal.
So, it is very complicated to bring components from China, believe me. I have been
It is.
It's always something. It's always something, believe me.
It's time, money, but also the climate issue when it comes to transporting.
Yes. But in the beginning of the podcast, you were referring to that you have a problem with people, academics, non-academics, working in aluminum industry. And one classical in this pod classical question is: if you were a young guy or girl, 25, finished school, want to have an interesting career, what would you advise them to do within the aluminum field then?
I think biggest problem for the industry, production industry, is not what they are doing, it's where they are. People are not prepared to move. We have the situation now up in North, for example. They are talking about they need some 20,000 people up there. But it's not about 20,000 people, it's about 100,000 people, because they have a husband or wife, they maybe have kids. On top of that, you need health security, you need shops, etc., etc. So I think what I've seen in this project we are running together with the steel industry and the foundry organization is the unwillingness to move where the job is. How many people would you get near to Skillingaryd? I mean, I was in a pub evening at KTH, Royal Technical High School, is the name of in English, I think. And I had 30 students from Bergsmännen.
You still exist?
They do. Oh. And I asked them if they can raise, how many of you are interested in working in another place in Stockholm? Not one single person raised their hand. But I said, the industry is not in Stockholm.
No.
So
you have your office, Jernkontoret, and what more?
Nothing. You have Scania and Södertälje maybe. But that's automotive, that's truck and buses. But that's the one thing. People are not prepared to move where the job are. For young people, and you ask me what I would do. The second thing is actually the self-picture that you have of your own industry is not very good. I mean, the attitude to the metal industry, that it's dirty, it's not very well paid, it's not very cool. That something that we need to change as well. I mean, if you talk to young students, when you meet them in career days, etc., I mean, they want to be YouTubers or influencers, or something like that. The metal industry is not interesting. We have to make it interesting. I ended up in the aluminium industry by happening, but I realized that it was fun. So once you get them in the industry, I think they will stay. But to attract them to go for a job in the metal industry, that's a challenge.
So it's the first recruitment that is the key.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
I found it very strange.
Yeah, but we see it now. High-pressure die casting has the big advantage that Mr. Musk does his giga castings, and now it becomes sort of cool. But still,
you're right.
people in and really not doing some fun jobs in the office, going really down to the production, pushing the knobs, getting the parts and that quality. That's still quite a few number of people that does it.
Yeah, but I think we in the casting industry, Fabian, we have set sail with Elon Musk at the rudder. And this will be cool, because if you look at it in Stockholm, in Gothenburg, you have this big founder for Volvo now in Hisingen, for example. That's one thing. The second thing is that you have a merger of disciplines, that for the first time in the foundry industry, you really have to have machine learning, metallurgists. There's a cross-functional team, because the process window is so small. In the old days, if you went down to Skillingeryd to Stilexo, Per Jansson and family, 15, 20 years ago, when I started to run there, they said, that's one of these educated bastards. Yeah. And you had to do 5 years being oily and shouted at by some team leader that his personal skills were a little bit. And then maybe you can start in the tool shop. So, I mean, the foundry industry has never had a better recruitment and marketing situation than right now, because everybody is dragging in and trying to pick everybody right now. So if you have 5-10 years in structural castings, I think you can choose if you like to work in a Tesla Berlin plant or in Göteborg. So in that sense, the foundry industry is in a good spot right now. For the first time since 1967.
And I mean, talking about cool industry, H2 Green Steel, hybrid in the steel industry, Northvolt, pretty cool company. The self-esteem actually is much higher there in that area. But if you go to a small casting SME somewhere down in Småland,
good luck.
They have difficulties, and we're not talking primary in our industry. We're not talking primary of academic recruitment. I mean, we need people on the floor, good, educated people on the floor, operators, and it's not easy.
It's not easy.
But the key word here is a little bit, because we are working right now in a project together with Jönköping University and Uppsala University, and called in competence resource. And I think we are finding bit by bit a little bit what needs to be done.
And what have you identified?
It's the self picture of what we are, what we do. We don't talk about ourselves with pride.
I think it comes down to market the industry better, that it's a great opportunity.
And young people today, they are not looking primary of salaries doesn't come on the top. It's what they do and what the company can offer them in their development of themselves as persons and workers. When I went for my first job, I was just happy to get a job and get my first salary. I worked as a postman, first job I had. That is different today among the young generation.
But I think it will open up also. It has to be a market, and you can be on the buying side or the selling side, basically on top level. And I was a little bit impressed, because what I saw at for example, Ericsson, which is my home base, as you know, when I started, we had like 5-6 different experts in die castings. Surface treatment guys, we had tool guys, we had actually one metallurgist more or less, and then we have a couple of guys that were experts in what you can cast, supporting the designers and all that. And then it diminished, went down to zero. But if you look now, with the designs that some Scandinavian telecom companies are having, and also with the giga castings that being developed by Volvo Göteborg, you also now are expanding, I think, the organization on the buying side. And I think this is important, because if you want to make a career, you can do a couple of years in the selling side, making the parts. And then you actually can find a job in, I don't know, cost engineering or blah, 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 design something at Volvo, for example. Then you can go back and forth. And that kind of doubles the market for employment. And I think this is an important thing and a trend. I don't know if it's happening outside Sweden, but I would assume it does.
But what you see is that the first step going into the production side is something not many people do. I had a call with some students doing their master thesis, and they were talking about some issues they want to solve with their master thesis. Before that, they never stepped into a foundry. they try to do it from their offices.
Mm.
And they were studying for what, 3-4 years?
Exactly, and then doing their final thesis. And I told them, hey, you work for a big company, take an internal internship and make your hands dirty, go into the production, see it for yourself, how a sampling process works. And then you can fact check. You don't need a simulation in the first place, just experience it, and then you can do a better analysis.
And a contact net, so someone to ask.
Exactly.
How does a furnace work?
Yeah.
I mean,
which parameters are important, because there are so many. Which one are really the knobs you want to turn, and which ones the knobs you shouldn't touch?
When I joined SAPA in 1980, they sent me out in the production for 3 months.
Oh, that was ambitious.
I'm really happy, because I worked in the production in different areas all over the company in Sweden, and doing extrusions. And going out then to the market, I know what I was talking about.
Yeah, otherwise it's very difficult. So what you're trying to say here when we asked, okay, where to start if you want to make some good money and have an interesting career, is pretty much be able to move and the world is yours within aluminum.
I would say so. Not only that, of course, but there's one big part of it. To be able for our industry to attract, and in that word attract, that means quite a hell of a lot of job for the company, as you were saying, Fabian, to market themselves as an interesting industry, as a good industry, as a cool industry, and then get people actually to move. And that is also a question for the whole society. It's not only about the companies. It's about the cities, the small cities where actually these companies are, to take part of that as well. And that's one part of in this project that we're talking about in the competence resourcing.
But sometimes I feel that, the pendulum is always going back and forth. And it has been a number of years with good times where everybody should be a YouTuber or a TV show host or, participating in Idol, singing and dancing and all that. But don't you think with the harsher times and Russia and all these things, we see that doing things comes into fashion again? Can't we get a little bit help from the general trend here?
I hope you're right, but it's a good transporting. But maybe back to basic.
I mean, how many lipsticks can you sell as an influencer? In Sweden, we have they start dominating the scene. I mean, there's no room for 15 more.
But I mean, if you look at the metal industry today, if you actually go there, it's digitalized. It's people are walking around in white collars. In the shop floor. Everything is automized, everything is digitalized. The picture of the metal industry must change to make it more interesting.
I think there should be update all the stock images that being used that are the same ones for 20 years.
Yeah.
You see the steel plants, it's always when you empty the converter and you have this flame of fire. It's always that one. It's like, Jesus Christ, guys, why don't you take a picture of a fighter jet or something where you can say that bolt is high precision steel from Sandvik.
That's one good example. I mean, sure.
And aluminium industry, it's always also the same. If you just pour the metal from one crucible in the next one, there's also something, there's molten metal and it's hot, and not the whole process chain, which is highly automated, highly complex in the meanwhile, and requires a lot of brain power to let that thing run smoothly.
Yeah, but I think the rolling mill industry is the worst one, because the only thing you see is the rolls, and then you have some pictures of some manager that has a white coat and in a laboratory and pointing at something, even in a yearbook of them, instead of actually pushing the cool parts that are made out of these things. I mean, sheet metal industry has always been, it's like a modern type of origami, right? I mean, in the 80s, Sony Walkman. Have you seen the inside of a Sony Walkman? How were they able to do that sheet metal processing? And it worked. It worked. Amazing. Yeah, I think we have a problem. But I usually say that marketing is, when God was giving out talent for marketing, at least the foundry guys, they were in another room. Because when they do a campaign, they take the telephone a little bit closer to themselves. That's an aggressive way of doing marketing in the foundry industry. You do what you have been told. You're selling your capacity, and believe it or not, I think the automotive industry has been such a pressure on price and cost that no one below 100 people or 200 people, for that sake, has been able to afford anybody who works with R&D development or business development.
No.
It's all about running the machine, high uptime, low salaries, push out the same product that you have been doing it for 22 years. That's why we see a crisis now. How do you cope with change if you don't have the people to do the changes?
One company that had success actually with the marketing side was actually the old SAPA in the 80s, 90s. They did understand the importance of marketing and how they did that. And they did the marketing by helping the customers to find the right way in many ways. Today, the market has changed a little bit.
Yeah. So what would you do today for marketing?
For marketing the industry?
Yeah.
I don't know, to be honest. That's what we are trying to find out. I mean, we are touching on it a little bit, maybe, that we need to give the world outside the fence a different picture of our industry, what we are, what we do, and actually to be proud of what we are doing, because we are good in our industry. On a global basis, we are damn good, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
I hope that we, with our podcast, can help you market that and also help us in the whole industry to make it cool and take it in a new format.
I hope so.
Come on. The three of us are pretty cool, right?
Yeah, aren't we?
So it was a pleasure having you here, Linge.
It was a great talk. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And very interesting to hear you talking about the CBAM and all around that. And I suddenly understood how many people that actually are working with the legislation and trying to push decision makers, governments in certain directions. And still gives me some hope when you're saying that you think CBAM is a good idea. It just have to be tweaked.
I think it basically is a good idea, but it needs to be tweaked. I think it has to be, and I think they will do that. I think it will be adjusted over time.
Let's hope. Let's hope. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for being here. Dear listener, don't forget to subscribe, and we hear us in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.